In this episode and the following episode, we are going to discuss cinema as a narrative art form. What do we mean by narrative? Narrative is an account of the story, how the story is told or represented on screen. That is called narrative. And the earliest account of narrative, earliest discussion on narrative came from Aristotle, long back, 350 BC. And Aristotle, in his Poetics, talked about drama, but what he discussed can be extended to other forms of narrative also, like literature or even to cinema. Modern film theorists took Aristotle and found that Aristotle's theories are still valid in analyzing and understanding the cinematic narrative art form. All narratives tell stories, and Aristotle told us that all stories can be divided into three basic segments. They must have a beginning, a middle, and end. The beginning can be discussed as, or the beginning can be considered as Act 1, the middle can be Act 2, and the end can be Act 3. So all stories or all narrative forms of storytelling, be it theatre, be it literature, be it novel, must have a beginning, middle and end, or must have Act 1, Act 2 and Act 3. And Aristotle noted something very, very important. In his view, the most important and fundamental objective of drama is catharsis. What is catharsis? Catharsis is the release of emotional build-up that comes at the end of a story. So all story must have emotion and there must be emotional build-up, and the end of the story, the emotional build-up should be released. So the audience will be relieved and happy. So in analyzing drama, Aristotle talked about 6 fundamental elements in drama. Once again, remember that this can be extended to any other art form, any other narrative art form. Number 1, he talked about something called theme. In Greek, it was Dionuya, meaning the central idea or meaning of the story. All the story must have a theme, must have a central idea, must have a concept, and it is called Dionuya. Second is mythos or plot, which is a structure of incidents. All stories of the world have a series of incidents, and in narrative, the series of incidents are structured. They are interwoven in such a manner that they create a pattern, and mythos is the plot that gives the structure to the series of incidents or events essential for any form of storytelling. Number 3 is ethos or character. Characters are there in the story to support the development of the plot, unfolding of the plot, and they make things happen. So characters play a very, very important role in Aristotelian theory. And what is interesting here to note is that they support the plot to unfold. We do not observe the characters in order to get into the story, but it is the incidents that is happening because of the characters play their role in the incident. So it is the event-based storytelling in which ethos or the characters play their significant role. Number 4 is melos or music. And music is used to create mood and emotion. From this word melos comes the later coinage of this new term called melodrama, which means that music-based entertainment. So melos or music works to create mood and emotion in any story, especially in dramatic art form, meaning theatre and cinema. Next is opsis or spectacle, which is the visible or external thing that may include costumes, set, props, or any other visual element that makes the visual interesting and outstanding. That is called Opsis or spectacle. And last is Lexis or Diction, the dialogue to support that supports the character, or the dialogues through which some element of the narrative is exposed. So Diction or Lexis is the sixth and the last element in Aristotelian analysis of drama. The audience, when they experience a narrative, they deduce or they conclude from the fact or reasoning presented by the drama. So what we witness in a dramatic either in theatre or in cinema, what we witness is a chain of events in which characters play their role, and the objective is to create emotion, heighten emotion in order to release, in order to create catharsis. And these are connected through logic, and logic demands reasoning. And because of the logic and reasoning, the audience are able to deduce or conclude from what they see on screen, and the meaning is created by this process. Based on Aristotle's classification, much later in modern days, especially in America, film theorists tried to analyze modern modes of storytelling, the cinematic mode of storytelling, and they found that Aristotelian theory is still valid. We can modify it, we can extend it, we can work on it, but it is still valid. And by using our own understanding of Aristotelian theories of drama, we can actually make sense of modern cinema in a much better way. One of the pioneers in film analysis, in cinematic theory, Sidfield, came up with a new theory of narrative, cinematic narrative. And he also agreed that modern cinema uses the three-act structure knowingly or unknowingly. And he tried to analyze the modern cinema based on Aristotelian theory. So he named Act 1 as setup, which is the beginning of the story. And in setup or in Act 1, he noticed that there are certain components that are essential to Act 1. One of the component would be exposition. In the exposition section, the characters are introduced and the dramatic premise, what the story is about, is told to the audience. So this is exposition, which is one of the essential elements of Act 1. Next comes inciting incident, which is another component of Act 1. Inciting incident occurs in the middle of the Act 1, and it sets the plot of the film in motion. Something happens and that starts the ball rolling. That is inciting incident, and it involves characters to the theme of the story in a more concrete way. Ziegfeld told about something called plot point. Plot points are turning points in the story. Story is told not in a linear fashion, but it has its own ups and downs. With the introduction of the inciting incident, the first plot point takes place. And in the first plot point in the narrative, where the main character or the central character or the protagonist takes on the problem created by or introduced by the inciting incident. So that is the first turning point in the story, which is called plot point 1. Then we come to Act 2, and Act 2 also got several components. One is called confrontation. So confrontation is something important in the story which begins at the beginning of Act 2. After taking the problem face to face, the main character comes to the obstacle which prevented him from solving the problem. So inciting incident introduced a problem. the story took a new turn, and the character, the central character or the protagonist, must face the obstacle created by inciting incident and try to solve his or her problem. Next is first culmination. First culmination is a dramatic point in the story in which we see that the central character, the protagonist, after facing the objectives or the obstacles, tried to solve that, tried to resolve that, and in the process appeared to be defeating. So that is another turning point in this story, and it is the first culmination according to Ziegfeld's paradigm. Next comes the midpoint, which is the halfway through the narrative, occurring after the first culmination, and it is the point where the story where the character is at its lowest point and farthest from the objective that is to be achieved. So midpoint is the lowest point in the narrative in terms of emotion, in terms of story, and this is the point where the central character appears to be almost defeated and there is no hope. And from this point we move to plot point 2, which is the second turning point in the story, and this is the moment when hero appears to be beaten and lost, but something happens to him or her to turn the situation around. So the hero or the protagonist turning around, facing the challenge once again, and to face the challenge and to resolve the challenge. That was his job. Hero's goal becomes reachable in this particular point, and when this happens, the second act almost nearly ends with this point. Then comes Act 3, and there are several components in Act 3 as well. The number one is resolution or the final action of the protagonist or the hero. The crisis that has been created by the inciting incident and that has gone through ups and downs because of plot point 1 and 2 needs to be resolved. And once in the third act the hero addresses the problem or the protagonist addresses the problem to resolve it, and as he or she attempts to resolve the problem, the story reaches its climax, which is the second and final culmination in the story, and it is the point where the story reaches maximum tension. It is the highest moment of tension in the story. And then denouement, which means the final unraveling of the plot or the complicated situation. So once the climax is reached, the problem is resolved, and it is once it is resolved, the climax is reaches its conclusion, and what happens is that we come back to the period of calm and equilibrium presented in the exposition. So we come to a conclusion in this point. Ziegfeld's analysis of Hollywood cinema, Western cinema, proves that Aristotle's theory is still valid, though he modified Aristotle's theories of drama and applied them to analyze narrative cinema of the West. Many other critics, they attempted to analyze modern cinema further using both Aristotle and Ziegfeld's model. What happened is that in modern analysis we find that there are certain stages that are essential in any narrative development. So what happens to a hero-centric cinema or hero-centric film? A film in which there is a central character, a hero or a heroine. So in a hero-centric film, what are the stages of hero's journey, so to say? So in Act 1, the hero takes on the problem. In Act 1, we introduce the hero, we introduce the problem, and we introduce the situation or the atmosphere. So Act 1 presents the three essential elements: the central character, the atmosphere, and the inciting incident. So hero takes on the problem in Act 1. The Act 1 establishes the scene and its narrative hook, meaning that once we introduce the inciting incident, the audience are hooked to the screen. They want to see what is going to happen next. That is called narrative hook in modern term. The introduction of the hero becomes very, very important because the inciting incident is connected to the central character or the hero or the protagonist. And also in this section in Act 1, it is possible to introduce the villain or the opposition. Villain can be a person, but opposition means something else. It can be a person, it can be a force of nature, it can be something else. Anyway, it should be an oppositional force that will pose the problem to hero, that will create obstacles for the hero to overcome. So introduction of the problem is also essential in the Act 1. And complication will also occur in this section when hero takes on the problem. Hero takes on the problem to resolve the situation, but willingly or unwillingly, he will not probably will be able to resolve it in this first section. So that takes us to the Act 2 or the next section when hero seems to be defeated by the problem. So once hero seems to be defeated by the problem in Act 1, in Act 2 moves further from that and after the complication scene. This is the section where the backstory elements and setting about the scene are also introduced in the narrative itself. So what happens in Act 2 is that hero seems to be defeated, and from there he must resurrect, he must come back, and hero must take on the situation face to face and start fight. There can be scenes on attack on hero or attack by the hero, meaning that central character or the protagonist must face the situation and try to resolve it. So it will be a confrontation of some kind. If it is a story between two characters, then it will be a frontal confrontation. But if it is a story about man versus universe, man versus something greater than human beings, something larger like a force of nature, a volcano or a cyclone, then it will be a different kind of confrontation. But the confrontation will be part of the Act 2. This is also the section when subplots are also revealed and subplots are also dealt with in the story. And also in this section one can find romantic interludes or other smaller subplot stories. There will be also in this section moment with the antagonist. We must know the other side in order to understand the nature of confrontation better. So that is also essential in this part. And the complication, which is also essential in this section because this will make the story more interesting. It will force the hero to come out of his shell and renewed energy, fight and try to defeat the opposition. Then comes the third act, which is the act in which the hero must resolve the problem. So this will be the section in which preparation for the climax will take place and resolution of the subplots, whatever little subplots that had been interwoven into the plot structure that needs to be resolved in this narrative section. And the climax will be, of course, one of the most important element in this section of the narrative, in the third act. And after the climax, which will finally resolve the problem, and then we'll come to the epilogue, maybe a conclusion of the story. So these are the stages through which the story will move from one point to the another. This is another way of looking at the narrative in order to understand how modern movies use narrative storytelling techniques.